That afternoon, the flower vendor had called the offices of the Diario de Barcelona and left a message for Miguel, saying he'd seen the man we had described to him, prowling around the old mansion like a ghost. It was past midnight when Miguel reached 32, Avenida del Tibidabo.
Julian, we must leave this place, Julian. Fumero is looking for you. That business with Aldaya was a trap.
I know.
The house is locked. Nobody has lived here for years. Come on, help me down and let's get out of here.
What is wrong?
It's nothing. Just some fever. I'm getting better.
I've never thanked you for everything you've done for me over the years, Miguel.
Don't begin now. I did what I had to do and what I wanted to do. There's nothing to thank me for.
How's Nuria?
The same as you left her. We got married months ago. I don't know whether she wrote to tell you. You have no right to approach her for everything, Julian.
I know I have no right for anything.
Why didn't you come to us for help, Julian?
I didn't want you to get into trouble.
That is out of your hands now. Where have you been all this time? We thought the ground had swallowed you.
Almost. I've been at home, in my father's apartment.
Miguel stared at his amazement. Julian went on to explain how, when he arrived in Barcelona, unsure of where to go, he had set off towards his childhood home, fearing there would be nobody left there. The doors of the hat shop were still open, and an old-looking man with no hair and no fire in his eyes languished behind the counter. Julian hadn't wanted to go in or let him know he'd returned, but Antoni Fortuny had raised his eyes and looked at the stranger on the other side of the window. Their eyes met. Much as Julian wanted to run away, he was paralyzed. He saw tears welling up in the hatter's eyes, saw him drag himself to the door and come out into the street, speechless. Without uttering a word, he led his son into the shop and pulled down the metal grill. Once the outer world had been sealed off, he embraced him, trembling and howling with grief. Later, the hatter explained that the police had been round asking after Julian 2 days earlier. Someone called Fumero, a man with a bad reputation, who had supposedly been in the pay of General God's fascist thugs only a month before and was now making out he was friends with the anarchists, had told him that Julian Carrix was on his way to Barcelona, that he'd cold-bloodedly murdered George Aldaya in Paris, and that he was sought for.
Whatever has brought you to Barcelona, son, let me do it for you. While you hide in the apartment, your room is just as you left it, and it's yours for however you long may need it.
Julian admitted that he'd returned to look for Penelope Aldaya. The hatter swore he would find her and that, once they had been reunited, he would help them both to flee to a safe place, far from Fumero, far from the past, far from everything. For days, Julian hid in the apartment in Ronda de San Antonio while the hatter combed the city looking for some sign of Penelope. Julian spent the days in his old room which, as his father had promised, wasn't changed, though now everything seemed smaller, as if objects had shrunk with time. Many of his old notebooks were still there, pencils he remembered sharpening the week he left for Paris, books waiting to be read, the boys' clean clothes in the cupboards. The hatter told Julian that Sophie had left him shortly after his escape, and although for years he didn't hear from her, she wrote to him at last from Bogota, where she had been living for some time with another man. They corresponded regularly, always talking about you, the Hatter admitted, because it's the only thing that binds us. When he spoke those words, it seemed to Julian that the Hatter had put off falling in love with his wife until he had already lost her.
You only love truly once in a lifetime, Julian. Even if you aren't always aware of it.
The Hatter, who seemed to be caught in a race against time to disentangle a whole life of misfortune, had no doubt that Penelope was that love of his son's life. Without realizing it, he thought that if he helped Julian recover her, perhaps he too would recover some part of what he had lost, that void that weighed on his bones like a curse. Despite his determination and much to his despair, the Hatter soon discovered that there was no trace of Penelope Aldaya or of her family in the whole of Barcelona. A man of humble origins who had to work all his life to stay solvent, the Hatter had never doubted the staying power of money and social station. But 15 years of ruin and destitution had been sufficient to remove mansions, industries, the very footprints of a dynasty from the face of the earth. When the name Aldaya was mentioned, there were many who had heard of it, but very few who remembered its significance. The day Miguel Moliner and I went to the hat shop and asked after Julian, the Hatter was certain we were two of Fomero's henchmen. Nobody was going to snatch his son away from him again. This time, God Almighty could descend from the heavens, the same God who had spent his whole life ignoring the Hatter's prayers, and Fortuny would gladly have pulled his eyes out if he dared take Julian away again. The Hatter was the man whom the flower vendor remembered seeing a few days before, prowling around the Aldaya mansion. What the flower vendor interpreted as pretty nasty was only the intensity that comes to those who, better late than never, have found a purpose in life and are pursuing it to make up for lost time. Unfortunately, the Lord once again disregarded the Hatter's pleadings. Having crossed the threshold of despair, the old man was still unable to find what he needed for his son's salvation, for his own salvation, some sign of the girl. How many lost souls do you need, Lord, to satisfy your hunger? The Hatter asked. God, in his infinite silence, looked at him without blinking.
I can't find her, Julian. But I swear I will.
Don't worry, Father. This is something I must do. You've already helped me as much as you could.
That night, Julian at last went out into the streets of Barcelona, determined to find Penelope. As Miguel listened to his friend's tale, it did not occur to him to be suspicious of the waiter when he went over to the telephone and mumbled something with his back to them, or later, when he surreptitiously kept an eye on the door, wiping glasses too thoroughly for an establishment where dirt was otherwise so at home. It didn't occur to him that Fomero would already have been in that cafe, and in dozens of cafes like it, a stone's throw from the Aldaya mansion, that as soon as Carrack set foot in any one of them, the call would be placed in a matter of seconds. When the police car stopped in front of the cafe and the waiter disappeared into the kitchen, Miguel felt the cold and serene stillness of faith. Carrack read his eyes, and they both turned at the same time to see 3 gray raincoats flapping behind the windows, 3 faces blowing steam onto the window pane. None of them was Fomero. The vultures preceded him.
Let's leave this place, Julian.
But there's nowhere to go.
Give me your papers, Julian. Your papers, Julian. Now! I have only a month left. Perhaps 2, with luck. One of us has to get out of here, Julian. You have more going for you than I do. I don't know whether you'll find Penelope, but Nuria is waiting for you.
Nuria is your wife.
Remember that deal we made? The day I die, all that was once mine will be yours.
Except your dreams.
They smiled at one another for the last time. Julian handed him his passport. Miguel put it next to the copy of The Shadow of the Wind that he had been carrying in his coat pocket since the day he'd received it.
See you soon.
There's no hurry. I'll be waiting.
He felt no pain, no fire. The impact, like a muffled blow, threw him into the window, extinguishing the sound and color of things. As he crashed through the pane, he noticed an intense cold creeping down his throat, and the light receding like dust in the wind. Miguel Moliner turned his head for the last time, and saw his friend Julian running down the street. Miguel was 36 years old, which was longer than he'd hoped to live. Before he collapsed onto a pavement strewn with blood-stained glass, he was already dead.